Board games, board games. I might be talking about board games, but I'm not gonna shout. I am starting off this streaming with a little bit of singing, and after I have finished this song, I guess I'll be talking about how a game can sometimes be too long. At least it is for me. I think that for other folk, it might be a bit different, and this topic might be a joke, but I'll try to ponder and analyze from their view, and I would love to have any input from you. Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good whatever it is, wherever you are, 10 a.m. is UK time for Busy Beats and Board Game Bladder. Episode 892 is a variable length an issue. Do we need a game to inexorably progress towards an end? Is that important? I mean, there's lots of games that don't necessarily just carrying on until the end. I mean, Monopoly, which it came out over a century ago now. Wow, it's 1913, I think, was when it was made. So 110 years. Wow, it's pretty old. But also within the last century, a more modern thing is Flux, which has done very well. And there is clearly a crowd out there who enjoys playing the game and doesn't have any terrible associations with having to say, you know what, we've played enough, we've enjoyed it. Or having a game where it could last 5 minutes or it could last hours and hours and hours is not an issue for those people. I think that with games, the more ego that you start putting into the game, the more it has to tie itself into a neat knot somewhere along the way. So for serious strategic game, for something that you are putting a lot more thought into and you are hoping to see the best results of, like maybe some long-term strategies. You might be doing a bit of engine building and making this house that can make that cow that can make this milk, and then you're getting your dairy farm on the go. I don't know why I went to dairy farming, but yeah, I do. It's because of one of the games that I'm playing on Board Game Arena just now. But you get the point. If you've got any long-term planning, you want to see the results of that, and you want to see if that long-term planning has worked out. Whereas if it's more of a, okay, cool, I've done this and I've rolled some dice and I've hit you, and then you're not investing too much effort into it, it feels like maybe less of a problem. But I'm going to discuss that in just a minute. First of all, as always, let me talk about recent highlights, living life and seeing the sights, recent highlights, playing games and other delights, recent highlights. Things that I am thankful for include pajamas and warm jumpers and general heating and bottles, even though they're plastic bottles. If they were, this one isn't made from recycled plastic, which is a shame, but that would be better. But just a vessel to put your liquids and effervescent vitamin pills. Honestly, yesterday I again stayed in, didn't do anything. Bummed around on the internet, read a lot of stuff, didn't do anything else. I'm not feeling okay, just need to hibernate or something for a while. But let's skim over that. Brilliant thing. What's a little thing which is brilliant? My brilliant thing for today is going to be certainty. Now, this ties into today's topic, which is the idea that if I start playing a game, I want to have an idea of roughly how long this is. If someone tells me, okay, this is a 5-minute game, then okay, if it's 10 minutes, then that's fair, because at those lower accounts, it's a bit hard to determine. But if we're still playing after 20 minutes, I'll be like, do I want to keep playing? And I might ask to be excused. If we're still playing after, before we've been playing for like an hour, then I'd be, broaching the topic of, okay, let's tie in some way of ensuring the game comes to an end. And so for me, it's the certainty. It's having, sorry, that's me bad mouthing some games, but the brilliant thing is the certainty. The brilliant thing is knowing, okay, that's happening there, that's happening there. I have this much time in my life. I'm going to do this for this amount of time. And so by having some ratcheted progress, as I call it, as it's been called, it means that we can fit the games into our lives rather than the games taking over our lives. Does that make sense? Let's get to the main topic. As always, comment, ask questions, fun, like, follow. So, how does a game end? I mean, sometimes it's complete, utter annihilation of everyone else, and that's probably the worst. I mean, whether it's Monopoly or Risk, Last Person Standing has some potential problems of boredom of the people who've been eliminated. And specifically in those two games, the main issue is that if you keep playing until the very end, then your wealth or your troops can, keep going back and forth, back and forth. And if you get into this situation where two people are roughly equally balanced, then it might be going back and forth with these two people a lot longer than is actually enjoyable. But again, the question is, what is enjoyable? To me, parts of the games are about the uncertainty. At the start, you've got any of us could win. It could go down any number of routes. In the middle, it's like, okay, well, some people are losing and I'm knocked out of the game. I'm probably going to lose. And then it narrows down until, all the possibilities have been collapsed into a couple rather than it being about everyone ganging up and all the negotiations. Once you're in that final situation with two people, back and forth, and it keeps on going. And that's when it's just like, well, at this point, I don't really care anymore. Now, that's a very personal, emotional response. It doesn't mean that these are inherently bad. If they were, then they certainly wouldn't have sold fabulously well. I mean, these are games that have sold way more than, not saying way more than I could hope to sell something of my own suggests that I'm not able to hope for much. I mean, I'm able to hope to sell 6 billion copies of a game. That would be cool, like selling one to literally every human. Well, I think that would be too much. Like one to every household would be enough. So let's say 3 billion. Anyway, in all seriousness, it sold way more than any of my games probably ever will. But things have moved on. So let's examine Skull. Now, in Skull, if you get something wrong, you lose a card. If you get something wrong again, you lose another card. Get something wrong 4 times, you're out of the game. Get something correct, you get a point. 2 points, you win the game. And it's these two contrasting forces that push you to make big leaps, to play the odds, to push your luck. And in Skull, formerly known as Skull and Roses, which, yeah, both are pretty good names, I find myself thinking, what have the other players done? Okay, I could go out, I could get a little bit closer to death, but I could get halfway to winning. And as soon as I've scored at 1 point, I could actually win the whole game. Oh, that person's done a thing. Well, I think that's 10. I think it's maybe not correct. And if I outbid them, then I could get a bit closer to losing. But if they scored at points, they have won. Now, this brings an incredible tension because you can never recover those cards. You can never go down in points. And it's this sort of inexorable progress that can never be taken away from you, which is called ratcheted progress, going like ratchets, only in one direction until it eventually gets to an end. And of course, Skull, having these two endgame conditions work in tandem, is just beautiful. I think that when we look at other things, okay, number of points. This can you take away? It's more important whether the progress is inexorable and what kind of progress it is. Can you lose your points once you've gathered a card? Can other people take it away from you, or could you fall down bad situation where you run out of money and you have to sell some of your cards to lose your points and take the game further away from an ending? If so, then is that a problem? And personally, I mean, my tastes do tend towards wanting games to end, wanting games to be wrapped up in a neat little bow, and wanting to say, hey, this is going to be roughly this long. This is going to take roughly this long. Once, even in Root, a war game, you're getting points, but you never lose them except for the birds. But for the most part, you're never losing them. You get points, you get more points, you get more points. Eventually, you get to 30, you win, boom. But if it's about, oh, all these resources are exhausted, well, maybe those resources are just going to go back into the market. Or if it's about the number of turns that you've taken, then at least you've got an idea, okay, we are playing for 4 rounds. But then when there's a key point of it lasts exactly this many rounds, there's the other danger that it feels a bit too overly predictable. I mean, when I consider the difference between for sale and Reiner Knizia, expeditions, everyone will probably be shouting at me, knowing what it is. Different suits, you put them in different places. Yeah, that's slightly embarrassing. Not Zinc and Gold. That's a totally different game. Yeah, I've had a complete brain fart. Knizia game, you draw a card, you put it down, and then you're... Anyway, the point is, whatever that game is, and I'm going to be annoyed now for forever until I find it out. The first thing you do on your turn is you draw a card, and you can either draw from the deck or you can draw from one of these discard piles. And that gives you some control over the end of the game. It makes it feel a tiny bit more dynamic, and it makes it feel like, oh, towards the end of the game, actually, where I draw from is a really meaningful decision. How do I analyze that? What is better for me right now? And I think it's interesting to compare that to For Sale, where each turn does pass really quickly because it's just turn order until pass bidding, or it's single blind bid in the second phase. And both of those are exceptionally fast, and the dynamic twist halfway through the game gives it a sense of progress. And you know that you're going to be using all your cards, and it fits neatly. But should the game have a variable end? Should it be a random card somewhere in the last stage where, I mean, sometimes, like I'm the Boss, a game where it's all about the negotiations, if you always knew exactly when the game was going to end, then it would mean that you're going to... It becomes a bit more analyzed. The last round is going to devolve into, okay, this is going to happen here, and this is exactly the deal that I need, otherwise it's not worth it for me. I'm not going to win. Whereas, one person is hoping that the game's about to end, the other person's hoping it lasts one longer. That's an interesting tension. And sometimes it does get to the very last possible card. Of course, it has to, for there to be a variable end, and for anything to be possible, it has to be the case that sometimes it gets to the very last turn and it's like, okay, now it's clearly ending. I guess the only other possibility would be that it can theoretically last forever, which is what I want games to shy away from. And if it's about me being knocked out, when I lose my resources, let them be lost. Let the other person actually take stuff out of the game. If there's a chance that the main objective might not happen, then please let there be a backup objective. I mean, look at Kitty Cataclysm, my own game, where the normal way for the game to end is someone's out of cards, they have nothing in their paws, maybe someone's stolen from them, maybe they've been picked on by the player on the right, which is good gamesmanship. Maybe they've just flown a bit too close to the sun, whatever, and then they. But sometimes that doesn't happen. So how should a game end? Well, when the deck runs out, that is the key thing. That means when the deck runs out, the game is over. Have an answer for that. I mean, Magic the Gathering, again, just to make sure, well, what happens when your deck runs out and then maybe you don't have enough resources to bring your opponent's health down to zero? Well, that's a possibility. Well, what do we do? Well, how about running out of cards in your deck means you lose the game? Very simple. There, boom, done. And it's that kind of fail-safe that I encourage you to think about. And so, does it really matter? I mean, certainly, even in modern day life, look at LCR and Flux and all the editions of it, and you'll probably be able to see that no, it doesn't have as big a problem for a casual audience, or a lot of people are willing to have that in their games. But all else being equal, if you can make it a little bit more certain, I mean, I'm not saying it always has to be exactly 10 turns. You could have a variable thing. It could be under the player control. It could be once all of these things are used up, and once they're taken from the resource board, they never go back in. But whatever it is, the important thing to my mind is that I could start playing, and after a few minutes, I don't have to say, what's to stop this hypothetically taking 100 hours? Because in the world of some games, yeah, you could have a game that lasts that long, and with both players doing their utmost to win. So, yeah, think about it. And if you've got any thoughts, I'd love to hear your stuff. Otherwise, question of the day. Here's a little question before we go on our way. Question of the day. I was going to ask what's your favorite game length, but then that's just such a terrible question. I mean, for me, it would, like, I guess my favorite game length, 7 minutes, because that feels like, okay, if I've taken the 30 seconds to get the game out of and put it in the middle of the table, even just putting the deck on the table, that takes a good 30 seconds. If the game is literally 2 minutes, then I'm expecting to play it multiple times. But my question is, what's a game that you think is possibly too short? Can you think of one? And and my follow-up question is, how do you feel about games that enforce best of 3 or something like that in order to make the game longer? I can't think of any published games right now off the top of my head that I would say are too short. I can think of the first edition of Wibble, which was the first time I ever playtested it. It was once you've got, I think, like 4 or 5, once you've got this many cards in front of you, you won the game. And that felt like, oh, that was fun, but that's it. And so it was having multiple rounds that made the game work and made it more enjoyable. It was kind of ironic, like counterintuitive. It was a surprise, astonishing that I had to make the game longer. And then even without the extra obligations every round, it was still working better that way. But then I added the extra obligations per round, and that was even better having a sense of continuity. But yeah, I feel like for me, even if a game is literally just 1 minute and that's it, I would be like, okay, that's the game. We got it out. We played it for 1 minute. Now let's play it again, and let's play it a few times and see who's the first to. Let's keep track of our scores. Let's make a sort of meta game out of it, where we keep track of our scores and see, okay, you've won 5 times, I've won 7 times. Okay, let's make it to the first to win 10 times if it's and or keep playing until we get bored. I don't think there is a game, but that is too short. But I know other people have said the opposite, so I'm genuinely curious. I might ask on Twitter as well. Over to you. What are you up to? You can share button if you want to. I am going to make sure to get outside, which I've not done for a couple of days. That's pretty much it. Otherwise, I am generally going to be continuing to hibernate and avoid anything to do with games. I've sent I did yesterday actually. The achievement is I emailed a couple of people and said I wouldn't be there. So yeah. Oh, bit sad I'm not at Nuremberg, but I'm going to make sure I get outside. It is a relatively blue sky today. Recap and wrap up before we finish up. So to recap and wrap up, games can be finished for all sorts of reasons. Whatever the reason that the game ends, other than number of rounds, obviously, there is a danger of backtracking on that. If there is a number of rounds, by the way, I would encourage folk to just tie the number of rounds to something that you take off every round, like for sale, where there's a deck of cards and you go through that, and then there's another deck of cards and you go through that, and that enforces this many rounds. I would say that if you're working on a game, if you don't have ratchet progress, really think carefully. Why? Why is there no way for after 2 hours of play, I should feel like the game has progressed since like the 1 hour mark? I mean, that's it. Like there are a lot of games where it might start off and then you build up and then it goes and then it can carry on infinitely. And yeah, think about that. And it shouldn't be that hard to put in something that stays away. I am Stuff by Bez in all of the places, stuffbybez.com/streams. Well, yeah, it's a website where I'm going to actually change the thing. It says that I'm away, whereas I'm definitely not away, sadly. Going to, yeah, I don't have much lined up, but lots of love. Share, spread the word. Thank you, everyone. And for now, the only thing left to say is bye, 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 bye. This is a goodbye song. Bye, 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 bye. Thank you for watching along. Bye, 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 bye. This is the end of the show. Bye, 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 bye. And now it's time to go. Bye, bye, everyone. Bye, bye. Bye, bye.